How coffee became everyone's favorite addiction, TCC. Every single day, human beings around the world consume 2.5 billion cups of coffee, 2.5 billion. It outsells tea in the West, it outlasted prohibition, it survived papal suspicion, government bans, and religious controversy. And yet, here we are, still brewing, still sipping, still absolutely hooked. So how did one little berry take over the entire world? We go back over 1,000 years, to the lush, mist-covered highlands of Ethiopia. No cities, no alarm clocks, no Monday morning meetings, just rolling green hills and a young goat herder named Kaldi going about his day when he notices something deeply unusual about his goats. They aren't sleeping. Not just that, they're jumping, restless, almost joyful, the kind of energy that doesn't belong in a field at midnight. Kaldi traces the cause to a cluster of wild shrubs dotted with bright red berries. His goats have been gorging on them all afternoon. So naturally, Kaldi does what any curious human would do. He tries one, then another, and suddenly, focus, warmth, alertness, a kind of electric clarity he'd never felt before. Historians debate how much of the Kaldi story is fact versus folklore, but it captures something deeply true about how coffee entered human life. It wasn't engineered, it wasn't the result of some great scientific breakthrough. Coffee was discovered by watching its effect on living creatures. The berry didn't announce itself, it simply worked, and that was enough. Here's something most people don't know. For centuries, nobody was drinking coffee, they were eating it. Early communities in Ethiopia would crush the raw berries, mix them with animal fat, and roll them into small balls. Essentially, the world's first energy bar. Portable, potent, packed with enough caffeine to keep a warrior marching or a traveler alert across long desert roads. The leap from eating coffee to drinking it happened much later, around the 15th century in the mountains of Yemen. And it happened for a reason that has nothing to do with flavor. Sufi monks began roasting the beans, grinding them, and boiling them into a dark, bitter liquid. Not because it tasted good, but because it kept them awake. These were men devoted to long nights of prayer and spiritual practice, and they needed their minds sharp when their bodies were begging for sleep. Coffee delivered every single time. And this is the first and most important truth about coffee's rise to global dominance. Its earliest and most loyal users weren't pleasure seekers. They were people who needed performance. Coffee didn't seduce the world with taste, it seduced the world with results. Word travels fast when something works this well. Across the Arab world, coffee became known as qahwa, a word tied to the idea of suppressing appetite and heightening sensation. In a region where alcohol was forbidden under Islamic law, coffee arrived as the perfect alternative, a legal stimulant, a social lubricant, a ritual that fits seamlessly into daily life. But the real revolution happened in buildings. In cities like Mecca, Cairo, and Istanbul, a brand new kind of public space emerged in the 15th and 16th centuries. They were called coffeehouses, and they were unlike anything the world had seen before. These weren't just places to grab a drink, they were debate halls, news centers, chess tables surrounded by philosophers arguing late into the night, merchants hammering out deals, poets performing to crowds of strangers. People called them schools of the wise, and the name stuck for a reason. Here's where coffee reveals its second superpower. Because caffeine doesn't just keep you awake, it makes you want to talk. It lowers inhibition, sharpens wit, and creates an almost magnetic pull towards conversation. Coffee didn't just wake people up, it plugged them into each other. And that social electricity is what made it genuinely unstoppable. Powerful things make powerful people nervous. As coffeehouses multiplied, so did the suspicion. Authorities across the Arab world began to worry. Here were these gathering spaces where ordinary people discussed politics, questioned leadership, and exchanged ideas freely, all while fully sober and completely alert. That combination terrified more than a few rulers. Bans were attempted, coffeehouses were shut down. In some cities, coffee was declared dangerous, even sinful. And every single time, the bans collapsed. Within years, sometimes months, because the people had tasted what coffee offered and they were not willing to give it up. This is the first recognizable signature of addiction. Not just the chemical kind, but the cultural kind. The kind where a thing becomes so woven into daily life, so tied to how people think and connect and function, that removing it feels less like quitting a habit and more like losing a piece of yourself. When coffee sailed into Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries, it arrived wearing suspicion like a coat. Some called it the bitter invention of Satan. Others labeled it the drink of Muslims. Exotic, foreign, and therefore dangerous. There were serious calls to ban it across the continent. The debate reached all the way to the Vatican, and then Pope Clement VIII did something no one expected. He tried it, he liked it, and just like that, coffee had the blessing of Rome. One papal sip changed the cultural trajectory of an entire continent. Within decades, coffee houses were erupting across London, Paris, and Vienna, and they carried the same electric energy they'd had in Istanbul and Cairo. Lloyd's of London, one of the most powerful insurance markets in history, traces its roots directly to a coffeehouse on Tower Street. The London Stock Exchange was also born in a coffeehouse. Enlightenment-era ideas about democracy, science, and human rights were debated, refined, and spread over coffee. The drink wasn't just fueling people, it was fueling civilization. By the 18th century, demand had exploded so dramatically that Europe went looking for places to grow it. Coffee cultivation spread through colonial trade into Indonesia, Brazil, and Colombia. Brazil, in particular, would go on to become the single largest coffee producer on earth, a title it still holds today, responsible for roughly a third 1/3 of the world's entire supply, and as production scaled, something fundamental shifted. Coffee stopped being a luxury for the privileged and became a necessity for the masses. The price dropped, the availability soared, and suddenly, from the factory floor to the scholar's desk, everyone was drinking it. Culture and history explain the spread of coffee, but science explains the grip. The active ingredient is caffeine, and caffeine is, without question, the most widely consumed psychoactive substance on the planet. What it does inside your brain is almost elegant in its simplicity. Throughout the day, your brain naturally accumulates a chemical called adenosine, essentially a biological measure of fatigue. The more adenosine builds up, the sleepier you feel. Caffeine works by sliding into the same receptor sites and blocking adenosine from docking. The fatigue signal gets jammed, and simultaneously, dopamine, your brain's reward chemical, flows more freely. The result is immediate and undeniable. Alertness sharpens, motivation returns, the weight of the day lifts at least for a while, and then it wears off, and your brain, now trained to associate that cup with feeling better, begins to ask for it again. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, persistently, every morning without fail. That is the loop, and once you're in it, you know exactly how it feels, because roughly 90% of adults in the world consume caffeine in some form every single day. The 19th and 20th centuries turned coffee from a ritual into a machine. Industrial roasting equipment standardized the flavor. Instant coffee, developed in the early 1900s, made it faster and cheaper than ever. Vacuum packaging extends its shelf life. And then came the third wave, the craft movement, where suddenly the origin of the bean, the altitude of the farm, the precise roast temperature, all of it mattered again. Coffee had gone from wild berry to spiritual tool to social institution to industrial commodity, and then somehow back to artisanal obsession. Today, coffee is a $600 billion global industry. It is the second most traded commodity in the world, after oil. Somewhere right now, in a tiny apartment, a corner office, a roadside stall in Nairobi, a cafe in Naples, a kitchen in Karachi, someone is making a cup. Not because they plan to, not because they consciously decided to, but because it's morning, and the body already knows what comes next. Coffee didn't conquer the world through force or clever marketing. It conquered the world by solving a problem every single human being shares. How do you stay awake, alert, and connected in a world that never stops demanding more of you? One berry, one cup, 1,000 years later, and we still haven't found a better answer.